Hello, welcome to the Live at Five with me, Josephine Hughes, on my Good Enough Counsellors page. And today, what we're going to be talking about is starting before you are ready. I speak to so many counsellors who want to get going on a new project, such as setting up their private practice or growing their private practice by taking a particular course of action, and they can delay doing it, particularly setting up in private practice because it's big and scary. And so, what I'm going to be talking about today is actually getting started. And I've really been thinking about it this week because on Thursday I am bringing out my brand new podcast called Good Enough Counsellors. And I have been hit with the launch nerves. So there's been a constant round of editing and re-editing, and me talking to my daughter, who's my editor, saying, "Are you sure this bit sounds all right?" And I'll come back to that in a moment. So what we're going to talk about is all about not letting perfectionism stop you and how it can affect you and how to get round it. But first off, I'm going to tell you a little story about my husband because it's just so relevant. And I can see there's 6 of you watching at the moment, so welcome. And if you're watching on the replay on Facebook, please just pop into the post #replay. And then I know who's been watching and I can have a chat with you. So do say hello in the comments as well if you're watching now. So my husband has been working in the computer programming industry for as long as I have known him. And I can remember times in our earlier marriage where he would just get really down in the dumps because my husband is a real creative person, and his way of creating is creating computer programs. And the way they used to program computer programs is that you'd get the people who wanted the program would give you a whole long set of requirements, and then the computer bots would go away and program according to these set of requirements, and it could take a year, 2 years, however long it takes. I mean, literally months and years. Then my poor husband would have to go through this phase of testing. He absolutely loathed testing. So it would go on for months. He'd just be testing. And he found that really frustrating because he's a creator at heart. And then the stuff would get delivered and it wouldn't actually be what people really needed. So that's how it used to be in the computer industry. And things have developed now, and if this is ringing any bells with anybody, you'll know what I'm talking about. They talk about something called agile programming now, and what they do is they have a set of requirements, but because the users find it very difficult to articulate what they want, it's like the computer people now will very quickly program something and then they'll test it out, get the users to test it out, and they'll be able to change things much more quickly. And what they're doing will evolve as time goes on. So it makes them very agile. That's why it's called agile programming. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I think it can really apply to what we're like when we are trying to get something new set up. So it might be you're doing something like me and you're setting up a new thing like a podcast, or it might be that you're doing something like private practice, or maybe you're running an online course so you want to do group work or something like that, but you keep hesitating because you're really worried about getting it wrong. And what I've learned from my husband and what I've learned through my own experience, and this is partly because I'm not very good at planning in advance, sometimes it's a really good idea to just jump in and get going. Now, for those of you who are sort of quite organised, that might bring you out in palpitations, but thinking, oh, I can't go in and not do it. But often what happens is you're actually able to work it out as you go along. And I think one of the problems that we can have is we want to have it all organised before we get started. So with one of my podcast episodes, I've been listening to Tracy Carlisle, and Tracy got set up in private practice a couple of years ago now during the pandemic. So, 3 years ago now, she actually got completely established in full-time private practice. But, what she was saying is she said, you think you've got to get everything ready beforehand. But what happened to her is that once she actually got going, she realized that the stuff that she thought she needed and had created actually wasn't quite right, because until she was actually in private practice, she wasn't really completely aware of how she wanted to do things. And so actually getting started, once she'd started, she then had to go back and change a lot of the stuff that she'd already planned, because actually it didn't suit her. And I think that's a really interesting perspective, because I think, most of us would think, I've got to get X, Y, and Z sorted out before I get started. So it's just a really interesting perspective to hear that. And I think what can happen, and do tell me if this is resonating with you, is we think to ourselves, when and then. So the when is, when I've got this next qualification, then I can start doing X, Y, or Z. Or when I've sorted out this particular thing, then I can get started. And it can be really frustrating if you're the user who wants to get going. So if you're the client or you're the person who wants to refer on, at the moment, I have a referral. I know exactly the person who could do it. I don't want to embarrass them. But, I contacted them and they're not quite ready yet because they've got another thing to sort out. And it's sort of like, when I've got sorted out with that, then I'll be able to help. And actually for sort of me and that client, that's actually quite frustrating, because you want to get started now. And for me, it's really convenient to be able to refer. It's the perfect person to refer to, but she's not ready. And it's like, almost like it's maybe a bit of a barrier that's getting in the way. Because the problem is we will always find another when. Because actually, it's not about us being completely ready. It's about us worrying about making a mistake. And it's about us worrying that if we make a mistake, what are people going to think? And as someone said, we always worry about being reported to the counselling police. Let's face it. Yeah, I'm always worried about that. Who's going to report me to BACP? And I do have a horrible feeling it's going to happen one of these days. Oh dear. But, it's one of those things that we worry about. But if we let that get in the way, we will never get started. There's always another reason why we could do more before we could get started. There's always something else that we could do. But actually, this is a quote that I had yesterday, and I was reading it out to people in my therapy growth group. And they said, this is so good. Continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection. It's better to get out there and to improve as you go along than it is to delay and delay and delay and never get started. I wonder if that's resonating with any of you. Do let me know in the comments. Brené Brown says, you're trying to be bulletproof. You want to be perfect. You're trying to be bulletproof. We want to protect ourselves from rejection. But actually, who wants to relate to anybody who's perfect? And as Brené teaches, it's all about being vulnerable. And it's the people who are prepared to be vulnerable who actually get things done. And if you've ever had a chance to read Daring Greatly, this is what Brené talks about. It's about being in the arena. It's about getting out there and getting dirty, the blood, the sweat, the tears, because you're actually doing something when you're in the arena. And Brené says that she said, she decided something and it was pretty dangerous. And what she decided was that she wasn't going to listen to the criticism of people unless they were in the arena too. And she said to realize that was really life-changing for her. It's all right, people standing on the sidelines telling you that you're not doing a good enough job, but actually, are they doing it? Do they know what it's like? Are they out there in the arena? Are they out there getting covered in dirt and sweating it out? And if they're not, then they don't have a right well, they've got every right to say what they think, but you don't actually have to take account of what they've said. So this is just a little thought there to leave with you. Um, and in my podcast, which is out on Thursday, it's called Good Enough Counsellors, in case you haven't heard about it already. On that first episode, yeah, I make a mistake. And I thought, what do I do? Do I re-record the whole episode? Oh, I just leave the mistake in. And I've left the mistake in. But I just actually think it's a really good learning curve. And so I've shared with people the fact that the mistake is there, and I've pointed it out, and actually talked about what that's like to make a mistake. Because we worry so much about making mistakes, but actually, if we're going to worry about making mistakes, we are never going to get started. So I find personally, the thing that really helps me is to have a deadline. And in order to make myself accountable, I will publish the deadline. So I decided in January that I was going to bring the podcast out on the 29th of February. And boy, that has really made me pull my finger out and get on with it. And also, my daughter's helping me because she's working to that deadline. She's really got on with it as well. So having a deadline where you've told people that you're going to deliver something can be really, really helpful, because actually it's more embarrassing not to deliver it than it is to worry about the mistakes. So that's how I do it. That's what works for me. But I would also just sort of like to mention this concept of failing fast. So the idea of failing fast is that you try something and you very quickly adapt and learn from your mistakes. It's not to say that failure is inevitable. Some people would say failure is inevitable. It doesn't mean that you're going to fail in everything you do. We all fail, don't we? But it doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily fail in this particular endeavor. But there will be aspects of it where you sort of think, well, I could improve this or I could improve that. But you don't know that unless you're actually doing it. It's all very well being in the ivory tower and saying, this is the way I'm going to do it. But until you're out there, until you're actually doing it, you won't actually be able to improve. And what I'm finding with my podcast is, I'm working several episodes ahead, and I am learning with every episode. And been driving my daughter a little bit mad, actually, because I say, actually, now I've listened back to this, I've realised that what I tend to do is go off on a tangent, and I've got to get rid of these tangents, and I'm editing it more, and I'm learning. And what I'm learning is that it's really important to stick with a basic message. And so, with each of my podcasts, I'm trying to narrow it down to that basic message. But I'm only learning that as I go along. I wouldn't have been able to learn that unless I was trying to do it, unless I was learning, unless I was listening and learning from what I'm listening to. In the same way that when you did your counselling qualification, you did a lot of role play practice, and then you'd listen back to it. I mean, in my case, I used to listen and listen and listen. I think, I missed this, I missed that. And it would teach me a lot about my listening and how to do it better. So if you are thinking about doing something new, what I would advise is to work out what's the bare minimum that I can get away with and just start. I hope that's really helpful. And if you want to listen to someone who's not perfect, but who has just started, look out for my podcast. It's coming out on Thursday, the 29th of February. We've got 2 episodes coming out. So the episode that I mentioned with Tracy, plus the first episode where I tell you about the mistake that I made. It's all about getting started. And then I'll be coming out every Thursday from there on in until such point as my daughter either decides she can't bear to work with me any longer, or I run out of ideas to talk about. Okay, thanks very much for watching. Please do just get started, because you're going to help people if you get started. Bye for now.